Well, this week the focus is the Fairfund Umbrella Beneficiary Fund. Of course, the managers there appointed by Fairheads. Fund size 764 million rand, objectives money market income fund and balanced fund. So Giselle, just walk us through how this fund is structured, the umbrella fund of course, and how it works.
If I may, Samantha, on that note, if you look at, for instance, the beneficiary fund, it has close to 10,000 beneficiaries in there. And then each beneficiary's account is then basically summated to make up the total fund investable amount. And then the trustees of the beneficiary fund, the board of trustees of the beneficiary fund, then take decisions in terms of developing an investment strategy, which first obviously states the objectives of the fund, bearing in mind that the bulk of the children who need a monthly income, looking at liquidity, looking at low-risk investments, looking at stable funds, and then secondly, looking at growth opportunities for children with big amounts and children that don't need regular income.
So how do you do that when you've got children with so many different ages within that?
Well, that is kind of what Fairheads have managed to systemize. So as we set up an account for a child, those parameters are immediately considered so that the investments can commence ASAP so that you can have decent returns, you know, to make sure you can start paying proper income.
Yes, I mean, I think that's important here, is that there's a very specific board of trustees at play over here. The board of trustees has to have an investment strategy document. That has to be reviewed on a yearly basis. So already we can see just the legislation here that's come into play is a lot more than there was previously. And then obviously that investment strategy document, you know, the Financial Services Board need to be able to walk in and say, listen, do we think this thing is up to scratch? Do we like what we see here? Or do we think that this needs to go back to the drawing board? And this becomes the responsibility of the trustee. So I mean, the onus, and it just helped me out here, Giselle, but the onus on the board of trustees here and on a trustee is nearly the same as what it is for a pension fund. I mean, there's a huge onus here on the trustee.
Definitely, Cobie, and bearing in mind also that there's no investment choice for these minor dependents because of the circumstances, and therefore the trustees have even more responsibility. But I may just add that last year was actually the focus year for the FSB on beneficiary funds, and we've had quite a number of inspections where exactly those kind of things had to be monitored and make sure that it's appropriate for these minor dependents.
What do you make of the asset allocation as it stands right now of the beneficiary fund? I mean, given of course you've got the need when you get closer towards 18, you need to have that income and the stability and conservative approach, and then of course when you're young you want growth. I mean, what do you make of it now?
This is the asset allocation, which is the aggregate of all the underlying assets, right? So this is an evolving asset allocation. You can actually infer from this the average age of the member, because we saw earlier on a 3-year-old and a 15-year-old's kind of asset allocation. So you're looking at probably about, I'm guessing, about 12 years is sort of your average age in that fund. But just in terms of those assets are then outsourced to third-party fund managers who then have existing funds that you invest in, is that right? Conservative, balanced, those kind of funds. And then you do obviously due diligences on those fund managers. And what is the benchmark typically for these managers? Because you obviously want to make sure that the managers are delivering on the mandate that you require. So is there a CPI kind of underpin in all of this that seems to, because that's a key goal, right, is to make sure that the children have an above inflation kind of growth. Is that the central kind of thematic behind whether you are succeeding or the underlying managers are succeeding in adding value to the clients?
I think, yeah, first of all, we need to obviously bear in mind the beneficiary fund, being a pension fund organization, needs to comply with Regulation 28, as Cobie mentioned earlier, which means we have to fall within those parameters. Right. But then also bearing that in mind, you need to ensure, because of the summation of all these benefits, at least there's institutional opportunities to get lower fees, to insist on proper benchmark and proper performance, which would probably be very difficult if you had to pay the money to a guardian and expect it to understand that and achieve all of that. So based on that, you know, with our asset consultants being Rousseau, they've been very supportive in working with the board to make sure different asset classes are applied, to make sure you meet the needs and liquidity of these children on a monthly basis. Sometimes you have emergencies in terms of medical, which can be fairly large amounts, and yet you need to be able to have the liquidity at that stage also. So therefore, you know, looking at your pure cash, you'd probably look at an intercall bank rate. and then going on to your income fund where the bulk of the assets are and where you need to be able to pay income. You need to enhance that income level at least to beyond that call rate and make sure there's an enhancement of income and interest payments, and that's been a portfolio that's been created, and it is actually the biggest one. And following that would then be your balance fund where you can give the growth opportunities and comparing that in the market regularly.
Well, let's actually maybe just show some of what Giselle has just spoken about. These are now the three options, and what we've done is I've actually plotted those on the same axis, assuming that you've invested 100 Rand in each one. By the way, the balance fund manager choice here for the trustees at the moment is the Allan Gray Balance Fund, and there you can see the returns for Allan Gray Balance over time. And you can see kind of the returns over there. The income portion is bond focused, or very short dated bond focused. That's the red line over there. And obviously the cash market is the other axis that you're seeing on the other side over there. So you'd get a combination of these three different options if you were actually investing. And quite frankly, if you then conglomerate everything, let's go back to the slide. This is what the asset allocation would look like for the full 764 million or 10,000 members that we're speaking about.
What about awareness in South Africa? Because in terms of 2009 to this point, the value of beneficiary funds has grown to around just over 5 billion Rand. How much awareness is there around beneficiary funds, the value that they can add? Do you see this as a growing asset space?
Definitely a lot of space for that, Samantha, in terms of education. Very few members would know what a beneficiary fund is, or even when they complete their nomination form, to understand that they have that option to choose for their minor dependents, in the event of their death. And I mean, it is a big shortcoming. We're trying to do as much as we can about educating the public, letting them understand what options they have, and just give people more peace of mind when you make those decisions, that your children would be taken care of properly.